Hello, and welcome to Size Me. I'm Donna, for those of you that don't know me, and today we're going to be going through the tutorial for the Vienne Coat. I have presumed you've cut everything out, you're all ready to go, you've transferred all your construction marks across onto your pattern pieces, and your machine is set up, you've checked the needle, and everything's going smoothly. So if that's the case, we can get going. Now the first step is to do some stay stitching on the necklines. And now stay stitching is just to stop everything stretching whilst you're handling it and sewing, so that when you come to fit other pattern pieces together, it's the shape that you expected it to be. That's basically what it's for. We're going to do it on the lining and on the main coat fabric, but I just wanted to show you something before we went a bit further. Now the fabric that I'm using today is beautiful, but it's very similar on both sides, so it's not very obvious the wrong side of the fabric. So what I've taken is just some soap from the bathroom from a hotel and drawn a big cross on the wrong side of the fabric. So that I can check when I'm working away. I've purposefully used soap because I know it's going to wash off. Put actually steam on the iron will wash it off. So that's where we're starting today. So we're just going to do our stay stitching. It's going to be at a 1 centimetre seam allowance all the way along each of those curves. So if you bear with me, I'll bring you around and you can have a look at what I'm up to. So the stitch length is our regular 2.5 or whatever your machine defaults to, and we're just going to use the plate here, and we're using the 1 centimetre, and we're just going to stitch around. So we're not stitching anything together at this point, we're just simply stitching through one layer of fabric along the neck edges. Now we're going to do this on 4 pieces, actually 6 pieces, so you've got 2 coat fronts of the main fabric and a back, and you've got the same in your lining. So I'll leave you to do that, and then we'll join back at the machine. And if you have your facings along with your lining front and back, that will be fab. See you soon. The next step that we're going to do is to create 2 little pleats in the back lining. So you should have drawn, you can see there, a stitch line from the neck edge, which is this one, and exactly the same at the bottom of the lining. Now all this is, we're just going to stitch down that line that you've created, and it creates a pleat, which gives excess fabric across the back when you're wearing the coat. You may have noticed this in ready-to-wear garments, but it is a really good tip for coats and things. So we're simply going to stitch down those lines, and I'm going to do a couple of back stitches at these points because they are going to get quite a bit of stress and strain when you're wearing it. So that's our next step. I'll bring you round so you can see a bit better. So we're set up exactly on the line, so we're not worrying about the seam allowance here, although actually I do know it's at 2 centimetres, so if you find that easier than following the line, just line up the edge of the fold here on the 2 centimetres, and we're simply going to go all the way to the bottom of that line. As I said, when we get to this bottom, I'm going to do a few back stitches just to reinforce that point. And then I'm going to repeat it at the bottom. We're going to do exactly the same thing, only this time I'm starting at the bottom, so I'm going to do all of those back stitches at the beginning. Okay, so there's our pleats. In the instructions I've asked you to press that to one side. It really doesn't matter which side you press it to, but if you press it nice and neatly to one side or the other, and then I'll see you back here with this lining back and your back hem facing. What we have here is the bottom of the lining back that you've just, so there's the little pleat that we've just pressed, and this is the correct side of the lining is facing us. You'll notice that along that bottom edge there are a couple of notches, a couple of construction marks that you should have noted, and then this here is the back hem facing, so you can see the cross here. So this is the wrong side of the fabric is facing upwards, and I'm going to simply lay it wrong way around. I'm going to lay it across that bottom and match it all the way across. Now you should be able to match the construction marks because you should have them in both pieces. That's a really handy way of knowing if this is the wrong way around, because if I tried this edge along here, there are no notches on here, so I would know it was upside down. That's really important if you are using a fabric that has a direction, because otherwise this fabric will be upside down. So pay attention to that. So I'm going to pin all the way along, but I am only going to stitch from this edge to the construction mark. I'm going to leave the gap in the middle, and then I'm going to stitch from this edge all the way across. When you're making this coat, it's really important that you are as accurate as you can be. When you attach your lining to the main coat, you'll really come unstuck if you haven't paid attention to things like seam allowance, if you haven't paid attention to your construction marks. So really do take some time to do that. Now I'm all pinned, I'll bring you round and then you can see how we're going to stitch it. So this seam's going to be stitched at the regular 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. So I've made sure I've lined the edge of this fabric with the correct number on the plate here. That's a really good way of making sure that you're accurate. We're going to do our regular back stitch. And then we're going to stitch gently until we get to that first construction mark. Did you notice that I had my pin in the opposite direction? I sometimes do that just so that I know that's where the construction mark is, so that I don't fly all the way past it. It is a good tip whether you guys want to use it or not. So I've got to that construction mark, so I'm going to do my back stitch. And then I'm going to take this off the machine and move it all the way down to the next construction mark, which as you can see is my next pin that's in that opposite direction. Once I'm there, I'm going to do my back stitch. I wish I put my pins in the right way around. And that's done. We're going to press all of those seams up towards the lining. So if I do it the right way around. So this is the bottom facing and this is the lining. We're going to press everything up towards the lining. I'll let you do that pressing, and then if you join me back at the machine with your lining fronts and your lining facings. So this is the front hem facing here, and I've got the correct side facing the ceiling, and this is the front lining, and again the correct side is facing the ceiling. Now it can be quite tricky to make sure that you have the right bottom facing. So I'm just going to go through the easiest way to make sure you've got the right one. First of all, your construction marks should match here. That's a biggie. But this edge, or one edge, should be straight down. And the other edge, if I can pull this out, can you see, might not be good with the angle, but there is actually a slope coming in on this edge, which continues on the lining here. So when you turn them to pin them, you're going to pin them face to face, right sides together. We'll match the construction mark, but can you see here how this goes all the way over? So it should be going in the opposite direction to this line here. Hopefully that makes sense, but do take a look at the pictures in the instructions as well, because that will help. And what we're going to do, we're going to pin down here. Again, we're going to match our construction marks, which is there. And we're going to pin all the way across the bottom edge. Then we're going to stitch it at a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. I'll leave you to do your pinning. You may as well do both sides, and we'll stitch them together in a sec. So when you're ready, we've lined up the 1.5 centimetre here, and we're just going to go do our back stitch. Sorry, I was trying to press the wrong foot. Do the back stitch, and then we're going. So we have another one of those to do, and then we're going to again press those seams. So this seam is going to be pressed up towards the lining, and then we'll work on putting the other facing onto this front. What we have here is the front lining piece with the facing of the hem that you've already applied, and then here I've laid on top the front facing. I just wanted you to pay attention to the notches on this piece, because otherwise it can go horribly wrong. So you should have the right sides of your facing the right side of your lining. You can see the cross on mine, should be visible. There is a notch here in the middle, but on the other side there is a double notch here. So what you want to make sure is that you've got the single notch matching along this edge. Once you've got that matching, you can continue to pin all the way down. It's very easy to put this on the wrong way around if you haven't put your construction marks on. So please, if you're struggling at this point because you haven't, just overlay your pattern piece again and put the construction marks in the right place. Otherwise you'll have a really weird shape to the front of your coat. And that's not what we're looking for, guys, is it? So now I've pinned this, I'm going to stitch it at our wonderful 1.5 centimetre seam allowance down there. And then we're going to press so that all of the seams are pressed towards the lining. You've got 2 of those to do, guys. I think you've seen enough of me stitching for now. So if you complete that bit, and I'll meet you back here, what I'd like you to have is the lining fronts and back that you've just been working on, and also your coat front and backs. Okay, see you in a moment. Okay, so this is the back lining, this is the shoulder and the neck edge here. I have the correct side of this lining facing the ceiling. Then I'm going to take the piece that we've just been working on, putting all the facing, so this is the front, and I've got the right sides of it is here, and I'm going to lay it so that the right sides of the fabric face each other across the shoulder there, and we're going to pin. This is when it starts to look like a coat, guys, hopefully. This is the point when you start to get excited. Long way to go, but this is a good point to start getting excited, I agree. So we're going to pin across there, and we're going to stitch at our 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Now you have 4 of these to do. You've got 2 on the lining, and I want you to repeat the same process on the jacket itself. Then you can meet me at the ironing board, and I'm going to show you how to press those seams open. So hopefully you can see this is the shoulder seam here that we've just stitched, and I've popped it on the ironing board. It's a really good thing to understand how pressing the seams open, what pressing the seams open actually means, because it's a little bit more involved than literally putting your finger and pressing. To get the neatest way, we're going to press towards one side, a little bit of steam, and then towards the other side with a little bit of steam. And what that does is it gives it some really crisp lines that we can then open it up out onto. So then we're going to open it out onto that way, and it will be really, really crisp seam. Just for an extra step that I like to do, I flipped it around, and we're going to just give it a little press on that side as well. So that's when I say press seams open, that's what I'm expecting you to do. So you get a lovely, smooth, crisp seam. Whilst we're here, I just want to talk a little bit about finishing the edges. As you can see, I've not finished any edges on this project yet, any of the seams. This coat is fully lined, so you shouldn't have to do any edge finishing. Apart from if your fabrics are really, really loose weaving and they're starting to disintegrate. And at that point, yes, we definitely need to start thinking about finishing those seams. You can have a look in your instructions, and there is a list, kind of a hierarchy of how you would go about doing that. My fabric isn't fraying too badly, so we're just going to crack on, and we're not going to do any seam finishes. Okay, I'll meet you back at the machine for the next step. I have a confession to make, guys. I forgot our pockets before we stitched our coat shoulders together. It's not the end of the world though, so don't worry, but I've just got a bit off-piste when it comes to the instructions. But we're going to step back now and do the pockets. Just to add to that error of mine, I also forgot to press record when I told you this a second ago, so I'm a little bit ahead of you. What I have in front of me is the pocket, the coat pocket, and it's facing with the right side facing the ceiling. Then on top I have the lining pocket, or the pocket lining, and this is the right side, and it's laid on top facing. I've matched at the top here, and these are the edges that have the 2 construction notches. I'll just show you where they are, here and here. And what you'll see is I've already stitched, unfortunately, but what we're going to do, we're going to stitch this side, leave a gap in the middle, and then stitch this side. So very similar to when we did the back hem facing on the coat, so we've left a gap in the middle. When we've done that, we're going to press all of those seams down towards the lining. I'll just do that now. So you can see how beautifully crisp that is, and then on the back all of that is pressed towards the lining. And I guess this is where the fun starts. So I'm going to put it onto the table. This is how we create something that looks a little bit more like a pocket. So this is the wrong side facing the ceiling. I'm going to take this top edge, start again. I want the right side facing. This is the right side of the pocket facing the ceiling. It's really sent me on a tiz doing it the wrong way around. I'll get back to it. We're going to take this one, fold it all the way down to match the bottom. And then we're going to match all 3 edges, and we're going to pin. we're going to pin this at we're going to stitch this at a 1 centimetre seam allowance. So we're not doing our regular 1.5 centimetre seam allowance for the pockets. We're going to use a 1 centimetre. Basically just to reduce a little bit of the bulk when you're turning it inside out, right way around. But if you do it at a 1.5, it really isn't the end of the world, so don't worry too much about it. Now I'm just going to stitch at that 1 centimetre all the way around those 3 edges, and then I'll see you at the ironing board with your 2 pockets and some scissors. So here is the pocket so far, and we're just going to snip the corners so that we can turn it really nice and smoothly. So I will bring you a close-up, but I'm going to clip 1 triangle off of the bottom like that, and then I'm going to do another one, and this just reduces the bulk further. Can you see how I've done that? Then on the top one, we're just going to cut just like that one. So we're going to do that to the other side. So 1 diagonal across the bottom, then a shallower one to reduce that bulk, and then across the top. This is the other pocket which I prepared earlier. So you're going to turn it the right way round using the gap that you left. You're going to gently push out all of the corners. Then when you're happy that your corners are pushed out, you may want to use something to do that. If you do, be very gentle, you don't poke straight through your seam. When you've done that, we're going to press it. And we want to be pressing it on the actual seam. So we're not just doing a 2-second job and flattening everything out. We're being very careful, because what we're trying to do is to make sure that the lining stays on the right side of the pocket. So can you see there? You can see a tiny bit of the actual coat fabric, and then on the other side there's no sign of that lining, and that's what we're trying to achieve with this press. So take your time. I'm not doing this any slower for your benefit. This is how long it would take me to do it. Okay, so that's this side with the lining, and then hopefully on this side we can't see any of the lining peeking through. When we've done that, we're just going to gently press in the middle, and then we're going to pop a pin across the gap that we have there in the lining. The next step is to top stitch across here so that we close that gap in the lining up. So I'll see you at the machine and we'll get set up ready to do that. So we have the pocket here. We've got the coat here and the lining on this side. So you can see it's the inside of the pocket that we're looking at. I've increased my stitch length to 4 for this. It will just look nicer because this top stitch will be visible on the right side of the pocket. What I'm hoping you can see from this angle is that we are stitching just on the lining side of this seam. Can you see the needle there? Just on this side. And we're just going to gently stitch across. This does 2 things. It adds a little bit of a tailored detail to your project, but what it also does is it closes up this gap here that we left for turning it the right way around. So I'm going to stitch all the way down. You have 2 of these to do, guys. I'm only going to show you the one. See if this camera angle lets me show you the finished. Oh, it does. So that's the right side with the lovely top stitching running across the bottom. If you do that on the other one, and then if you meet me back here with both your pockets, pins and the coat, so it's the front of your coat that we're interested in. See you in a sec. Okay, so what we have here, this is the front of your coat, and this is the correct side of the coat fabric that we're looking at. And then you have, I've done them as tailor's tacks just for the video, but however you've marked those 2 points for your pocket placement here, And that's what we're going to use to line up the two tops of our pocket. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. Once you're happy with that, you're going to pin them in place, and you're going to pin all the way through to the other side of the fabric. So making sure that these 2 points match the top of your pocket. So that's pinned all the way around. We're going to top stitch it. So our machine is already set at this stitch length of 4. So we're going to leave it where it is, and then I'll join you at the machine and we're going to stitch across those 3 points. So this here is the pocket and this is the coat itself. I wanted to just show you how close we're going to try and get to this pocket edge. If you go too close, there's a danger you're going to slip off. But if you go too far this direction, then the pocket's going to look a bit weird. So find the angle, or rather find the position that works best for you. Now, your hands going in and out of your pockets all the time is going to create some stress at these top points. So I really want you to go backwards and forwards a couple of times here, just to make sure you're not going to have any problems whilst you're wearing. And then you're going to gently stitch all the way around. That first bit's always the hardest because you've got all the bulk of the folded over fabric. It should get easier as you work your way down towards the bottom corner. I'm just going to show you one of the techniques of turning a corner whilst you're here, whilst I can. So we're approaching the corner now, and sometimes it's hard to judge how far you're going to go. So I'm just going to check if I'm in the right location. And actually, I'm a bit too far that way. So I'm going to switch it back, put my foot back down, and I'm going to use the flywheel just to do one stitch. So I haven't pressed my foot down, I've done it by hand, and then I can lift and have another check and see how I feel. And there we go, we're exactly in the right position, and we can set off again. Now I'm going to do this all the way around. We've got 2 pockets to pop on. And then we're going to do the side seams. So once you've stitched your pockets back on, I'll meet you back here, and we'll make it look more like a coat. So the next step before we start working on the sleeves is to stitch the side seams of both your coat and lining. So we simply match the bottom hem here, pin all the way up to the underarm there, and then we're going to stitch at a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. We're going to pop our stitch length back to 2.5 before we forget, and we're going to simply stitch that seam and press it open. So you have 4 of those to do, guys. I'll leave you to do that, and then we'll meet back here. And if you could have your sleeves, so both your coat sleeves, main fabric sleeves, and your lining sleeves. So if you're ready, let's do some work on the sleeves. First of all, we'll look at the actual coat main fabric sleeves. And I'm going to flip it over so we have the right side looking at the ceiling. We're then simply going to fold it in half like that. So up here is the rounded bit and down here is the hem. So we're going to pin all the way up there. Now, what you should notice if you cut out accurately is that there's a strange shape to the hem here. Now, I want you to keep that in mind. I want you to pin that shape as it is, so there's like a kink in the line, and I want you to stitch that kink in. So you're going to turn a slight corner when you're stitching that one. When you've pinned and paid attention to that little quirk on the bottom, I want you to stitch both sleeves on this underarm seam that we're pinning at a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. So just a regular seam allowance. And then I would like you to press them open. Okay, so we're all pinned. So we're going to take notice of this little quirk. We're going to stitch and then all the way up at a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Now, whilst I have your attention, I'm going to pop that to one side and we're going to have a look at the lining one too, because it's just only very slightly different. The first thing to notice is it doesn't have that shaping at the bottom of the sleeve, so you don't need to worry about that. We're going to fold it right sides together, so this is the good side of the lining fabric. We're going to simply fold it all the way over, match it at the bottom and pin it all the way up. Now, what you will notice as you're pinning is that there are 2 notches on this one, but they're not the kind of notches that you can match because there isn't any on the opposite side. So I would like you just to put one of our pins in the other direction when you hit those notches, and I will explain what they're for in a second. So we're just simply going to pin all the way up, just like we did on the main fabric. Okay, so you see the 2 pins. On one of your sleeves, I just want you to stitch all the way up to the top. But on the other one, I would like you to leave a gap between those 2 pins, please. So you're just going to stitch the bottom, leave a gap and top, but only on one of your sleeves. So I'll leave you to stitch those. So you've got 2 coats that you're going to pay attention to the hem detail and then all the way up the top. And then you've got 2 lining sleeves. One's going to go all the way to the top and one's going to leave a gap in the middle here. Press your seams open and then we'll get to the good bit, guys, which is actually looking how to inset these sleeves into your lining and your jacket. See you in a bit. Right, so giving yourself some room, have a coffee, have a chill before you start this. It is one thing that lots of sewers avoid, especially new sewers. But there's a technique to it, there's a technique to everything. I put my sleeves in slightly different to the standard way, I suppose. Maybe slightly different to how other people do it, I'm not sure. But this is how I do it, and I do it this way because I find it's more successful for me. I'm not saying any other way is wrong or mine is right, it's just the way that I find easier to do it. So I'm going to show you how to do it, how I do it, and you can decide. Now, you're probably going to unpin this, you're probably going to unpick it if it's your first time, second, third time. It really does go like that, unfortunately. But when you achieve it, when you do it, you'll be so chuffed with yourself. Unfortunately, once you've got that technique, it's really difficult to make it look as hard as what it is. When I do it, it probably looks really simple. But that's just because I'm manipulating the fabric because I've done it lots of times. So don't be disappointed if it takes you a while. You have 4 of them on this project to practice. So I'm sure you'll have nailed it by the time you get to the end. So should we do it? Come on. This is the coat. And this is the armhole. I have it inside out. So you can see the seams. This is the sleeve, and the sleeve is the right way round, so we can't see any of the seams. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pass that into the armhole. So the sleeve is going all the way into the armhole. I will keep holding it up to show you. There's not a good angle to show this, so I'll keep showing you, I promise. Now, the first thing to do is you're going to take the seam on your sleeve and you're going to match it with the seam on your underarm in your coat. That's where it all starts. So we're going to pin that together. Then I want you to check that you've actually got the correct sleeve, because you can have the wrong sleeve. Sleeves are shaped differently to accommodate the shoulder and the bust and movement and things. So don't just assume you've got the right sleeve. What you will have noticed when you transferred all your construction marks is that there is a double notch on one side and a single on the other. This is your opportunity to check that they match. So let's have a look. I've got the right one for a change. So I have my 2 notches matching here. So I'm going to put a pin at those notches and make them match. If they don't match, just get the other sleeve and repeat the process. But it is important you have the right sleeve. I'm then going up the other side and I've found my single notch and I'm going to match that one as well. So sleeves are all about finding the places that should match and then working out how you're going to deal with the bit in between that looks impossible. We've got 3 pins at the minute, one at the double notch, one at the underarm seam and one at the single notch. I then want you to go to the top of the sleeve and you should have a notch there that you can match with the shoulder seam. So that's 4 pins so far. See if I can spin that around to show you. So I have a pin here matching the seams. This pin is the single notch. This pin is the double notch. And then we have one right up at the top here that we just put in for the shoulder, for the seam at the shoulder. And then you can kind of have a look at what the problem is. So you've got a lot of excess fabric that needs to fit between your notch and your shoulder point, and that's where things get difficult. So I'm going to change the angle of the camera so that hopefully you can see what I'm doing better. But if you've got to that stage, and then I'll bring you around. So here's the underarm seam, and here are the single and double notches, and hopefully you can see at the top there is the shoulder, and you can see all this excess that we need to deal with, and we need to get rid of it so that we can stitch without any issues. I'm showing you on the coat simply because the coat stands up properly, so it's better for the camera, but it's exactly the same process that you're going to do with the lining, so don't worry about it. First thing I've done is I've created the curve of the arm. That's the most important part initially. And I'm not going to be overwhelmed. I'm literally going to start on this side. So let's just pull that round. So I'm going to work between these 2 pins. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to gently make this excess even. Okay, so can you see how it's a much more even ripple? I'm going to take a pin and I'm going to put the pin at the seam allowance, which is 1.5 centimetres. So the reason I put it 1.5 centimetres is because that's the bit that we're going to stitch. If I put it up here, you would still have all this ripple and this problem where you're going to stitch. And if I put it down here, that ripple would just be further down. So what we're trying to do is mimic where we're going to stitch, and we're transferring all this excess, all this ripple up into the seam allowance. So it might be a bit clearer with the next pin. So I'm going to tackle this bit here. So I'm going to take a pin. I'm going to use my thumb to smush, if that's the technical word, the fabric. So the ripple is still there, but can you see where we're stitching is relatively flat? And that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to move over here and deal with this bit and put another pin in there. Now, you sometimes put a pin in and it's not very successful, so you take it back out again and you start all over again, and that's absolutely fine. There is no rule saying how long this should take. There is no medals for doing it really quickly. I might start to give a medal out if you do it well, maybe. But we're just going to work our way around till we meet this pin here, which is the notch. Can you see the notch there? Okay, pop this pin in. So hopefully you can see, you've still got that ripple, that excess is still there. But where you're going to stitch is nice and flat. And that is what we're trying to achieve. So let's work on the other half. And like I say, unfortunately, because I've done this a lot over the years, I do make it look easy, and I apologise for that, but I don't know how to now make it look hard because I've got the technique. But let me try and explain how I do it. I've got the curve, and the curve helps form these ripples. If I had it straight, I'm in no man's land, yeah? So we're going to create the curve. And I'm just gently with my thumb sort of moving the inside fabric so that it matches the seam there. Can you see that? Bring that down. So this is nice and straight. So that's pretty much even, I think. So we're going to go in and we're going to, I always try to work from the middle. There's something, blunt pin. There's something about working from the middle that kind of, I feel like I've halved my problem. So now I can focus on this bit here. So if your ripples have kind of gone out of sync, just redo them. But this time you're just focusing between this pin and this pin. So let's get in here, let's get some pins in. So again, the pin is going at the seam allowance. If you feel it's easier to put the pin, to draw on the seam allowance so you know where you're pinning, that if that's helpful, then do that. I just can judge it. It's just one of those things. So hopefully you can see it's nice and flat where we're going to stitch, and the ripple still there, but it's in the seam allowance. So let's tackle this bit. Now some sleeves have more ease than others, so you might have more fabric to ease in. Some don't have very much, so you might think, oh great, I've nailed it today, but then you start on another one and you want to cry. That's perfectly normal. The other thing is that if you have a stretch fabric, sometimes you can stretch a little bit whilst you're pinning. It does help you get them in the right location. And different fabrics will cause different problems. So you would have assumed that a big bulky fabric would be difficult, but actually I find a bulkier fabric slightly easier than the thinner fabrics. But you're going to get a chance to practice both anyway. Now the technique doesn't stop here. That's the pinning. I'm now going to show you how I stitch it, because it may be slightly different than what you expect to see. I'll just turn you around. Hopefully this angle allows you to kind of see what I'm seeing while I'm stitching. And I'm going to try and keep my hands out of the way and not block you as best I can. So let me just explain what you're looking at. This is the sleeve going up here and coming around the back. So it's not over the top of the machine. It's actually coming up here. Some people think you put it on the machine and that just causes more problems. I'm starting at the underarm seam here, and we're going to go, let there be light. We're going to go backwards and forwards here, and we're checking that we are at the correct seam allowance, the 1.5 centimetres. Now, we're only going to work on about that much at a time. Because otherwise you end up getting yourself in a bit of a twist. So let's do this first bit, and notice that this is the curve. So we're letting it be the curve. We're not straightening it up. We're allowing that curve to be in the fabric. So let's go. Just have a pin under there that's snuck under there. So we're still on the easy bit really. We're just about to pass the first notch, and that's when we started doing our gathering. Hopefully you've noticed I keep stopping and I keep adjusting the fabric, and I keep checking under here that there's no lumps and bumps. That's what I'm doing. And I'm using these fingers to check that there's nothing pleated underneath. And we're also maintaining this curve. So remember, we pinned it in and it made it easier if it was curved. So the theory is that therefore it's easy to stitch if it's still curved. So let's see how far we get with this. So can you see how I'm kind of lifting up? I'm trying not to let this hand get in the way. It is difficult for the angle of the camera. And then I'm taking the pin out at the last moment. Okay, so I'm going to pull this round. I'm going to pull underneath so that everything is nice and neat. I'm going to check with my fingers here that nothing is in the way of where we're going to stitch. Check my seam allowance. And we're going to pull it round. Just going to see if I can move the camera angle to give you a better view, because I feel like this hand's blocking you every time. Let's see how this works. So I'm constantly checking. Can you see there's a ripple here now? So if I create that curve again, actually where I'm stitching is nice and flat. This still isn't the best angle. Let me see if I can take you around the back. Bear with me. Let's see if this is a better angle so you can actually see what I'm up to. I'm going to keep talking whilst I stitch. And I'm assuming you can see what I'm talking about because I can't see you. So I'm checking with my finger here. There's no lumps and bumps, and then we're off. I'm checking the seam allowance, and then I'm constantly readjusting here. I'm going to take that pin out at the last moment, and then I'm going to continue to stitch. I'm hoping you can see the ripple that we're getting past. And I'm hoping you can see that actually we're not stitching the ripple in, it's still up there in the seam allowance, and that's what stitching that ease in does. So we're getting up to the top here. I'm just checking that we've got no lumps and bumps, because any lumps and bumps that I can feel is likely to be the fabric underneath bunched up. So we're going to end up stitching a little nick, little pleat into the sleeve head, which isn't going to look very nice. So this pin is the top, so we're halfway there, guys. And we're off. Going to pull that back. Constantly checking, constantly recreating that curve and taking our pins out at the last minute. If we don't take the pins out at the last minute, what happens is all of that gather is free again. So all of that hard work pinning and checking everything was correct, you've lost it all because you took the pin out too early. So it has to be at the last minute. I've got a little bump under there, so I'm just trying to figure out what its problem is. And again, I'm not doing this slowly for your benefit. This is the speed at which I would stitch a sleeve in. If I go any faster, I know I'm going to go wrong. So I always prefer to go slow and steady and make sure I've got everything right. So I'm just coming back to the underarm here. I'm going to take it off. I'll change the camera angle so you can see it from the other side. Hopefully that angle worked for you, but I just want to show you the sleeve. Okay, so needs a good press, but you can see there are no little pleats on the inside. But look at the no pleats on the outside, but look at the inside. We still have all that excess, but it's in the seam allowance, exactly where it needs to be. Now, take your time with this, guys. You've got 4 to do. Just nice and steady. If you have to unpick, that's not a problem. I'll see you when you've done all 4 and you've given everything a good old press. And I would like you to have with you the lining, the coat and the collar. See you soon. Hopefully you're still my friend, and hopefully your sleeves look beautiful. I'm sure that they do. Now we're going to connect the coat and the lining together, but the first thing we're going to use to do that, is the collar. So you should have a collar piece that looks like this. Okay, what I'm showing you is the right side of the collar, and then what I have laid down here is the lining. And I've got it the right way round, but this long line here is the neck edge. Okay, so the right side of the lining is facing me, and I'm going to place it with the right side of the collar facing it. Now there is a notch, a little construction mark in the centre of your collar that I would like you to match up with the pleat in your lining. That's our first job. And then we need to take the end and go right to the end of the neckline and put a pin. And I want you to make sure that these two pieces match in this direction as well as the direction that you're actually going to be stitching. Once you're happy with that, pop a pin. And then we're going to go right to the other side and do exactly the same thing. So that's 3 points in this collar marked. And what I'm wanting you to do is to pin all the way so that all of this matches. Now, I just want you to think whilst you're doing that you're actually pinning curves at some point. So although it won't be as difficult as the sleeves that you've just eased in place, what you might need to do, is to ease your fabric around the curve on the neck edge. So remember, you've got your 3 places that are fixed, and I'm just pushing it down. And again, I'm kind of creating another ripple, but it's not as dramatic as the one that we did for the sleeves, because we've got the curve of the neckline that we're trying to accommodate here. Okay, so that's that bit pinned. You can see with the shadow here where it's trying to curve. Yeah, and that's what we're looking for. And then we're going to continue and do that on the other direction. Once you've pinned it, you can stitch it, and you're going to stitch it at a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance with your regular stitch length. And when you've done that, you're going to press all of the seams up towards the collar. When you've done that, I will meet you with this and also the coat, and we'll attach the two together. See you in a bit. So this is the collar all attached to your lining, and the right side is facing upwards. And what I have here is the coat with the right sides facing you. And I'm going to lay it down so that it's right sides together. And what we're going to do, if I lift this up, is we're going to attach the coat to this side of the collar, to this long edge. So in the same way, we're going to lay it on top. We're going to match those centre points. You should have some construction marks there to match. And then we're going to match the end in exactly the same way as we did with the lining. And the other end. And we're going to pin in between, easing everything that we need to ease in exactly the same way as we did with the lining. And then we're going to stitch at a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. When you've then pressed your seams up towards the collar, I'll meet you back here and I'll show you the step where we can attach everything completely. I need to stand up for this bit. So what you have, or should have, is something that looks like this. So we have the lining attached to the collar in the middle, and then the coat is attached to the collar at the other side. So what I'd like you to do, this is the collar. I want you to fold the collar in half and pin it at that seam. So match the 2 collar seams and pin. What you should then be able to do is to follow the edge of the lining and match it with the edge of your coat fabric until you get to the bottom, and I want you to put a pin in the bottom. I told you I needed to stand up. There's so much coat to work with now. There should also be a construction mark halfway down this edge, and I'd like to put a pin to match those. We're then going along the bottom of the hem, so we're going to match the side seams. Put a pin in it. Going to go all the way along the bottom until I get to the other side seam. And guess what? We're going to put a pin in it. Like so. And then we're going to work up the other side. So we're going to start at the corner. Sorry. There we go. We're going to start at the corner here. And I'm just matching all of the bits of the jacket that I know should match. So as we go up this edge, we should have a double notch that we can pin. And then we're back to the other side with the collar seams that we can match. Now, other than your arms not being inside each other, hopefully you can see that we're starting to look like a coat now. What I would like you to do is to pin between all of those fixed points that we've just done, and then you're stitching all the way around. So you're going from the fold in the collar down across the bottom and all the way back up to the fold in the collar at the other side. You're going to use your normal 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, and when you've done that, I'll go through the next step with you. Okay, so the first thing that I need you to do is to trim your corners. So this is the bottom edge. We've trimmed it exactly like we trimmed the pockets. I want you to do that on the bottom, and then right up where the collar is, I want you to do that with it. So we're just a bit closer. We're just chopping out the excess so that when we turn it, it's going to look beautiful. Now the next bit is the bit that drives everybody bonkers. It's not difficult, it's just awkward. So just persevere with it. Now what we're trying to do is to press all of the seams that you've just stitched towards the lining. So this is the line that you've just stitched here, and we want to press all of that seam back towards the lining. We want to do that down those 3 edges. Now it can be difficult, but the way I find is easiest is if you almost pull the lining away from the jacket. And then I have one of these, it's a sleeve board, like a little mini ironing board. Now I've flattened it out and I'm just going to put it inside the coat, so that's through the gap at the back that we left. And I'm going to take it around inside the coat until we're at the location that we want, which is here, so the board's underneath. And then I'm going to simply use the iron and press all of this seam towards the lining side of the coat. Now it's a little bit of negotiating needing to be done. It will make the next step much easier, so I do hope you persevere and do it. When you've done that, I'll meet you back at the sewing machine and we'll do our understitching. So this is another awkward part. Again, not difficult, just awkward part to the project. And understitching is to prevent your lining curling back over onto the right side of your coat. So I do hope that you do it, but the way I find easiest, if we take this part of your machine off, and then we feed the coat onto your machine using the hole in the back that we used for the pressing. So I'm just going to negotiate that onto there. Now, I'm probably going to cover the camera up until I'm in the right location. And I'm just going to feed everything so that I'm as close to the bottom corner as I can be. Make sure it's the correct seam that you're following, because you've got 2 seams. You've got the seam that attached the facing to the lining, but then you've got the one where the facing is attached to your coat, and it's that one that we're looking for. Okay, so you won't be able to see the close-up, but there is a picture inside the instructions that's a close-up for you. I just wanted to show the big view so that you can see how I have to fight and negotiate the fabric, so that you don't think it's something that you're doing wrong whilst you're doing it. I'm going to put my stitch length all the way up to 4. and I'm stitching on the lining side of this stitching that we did for that the last step. Sorry, start again. We're stitching on the lining side of the row of stitching that you've just pressed that seam on. Now you'll notice I can't get right to this corner because it's impossible, so I've just gone as close as I can do without causing myself too many problems. So I'm probably 5 or 6 centimeters away from that corner, and that's absolutely fine. Once you're in an okay position, you can go, and all you're doing is stitching as close as you can be to that original stitch line. I want you to be constantly checking underneath that you haven't got anything caught. Now this first row I've just decided to go along the bottom, so we're going all the way on the bottom to the other corner, and again I can't go all the way into the corner, so I'm going to stop round about the same distance away. So this is the corner that I'm aiming for, so we're not too far to go. I do feel like the lining is fighting with me at this point in time, so I just keep checking that the lining isn't caught. Okay, so I'm as close as I feel comfortable going into that corner, so I'm going to stop there. I'm going to lift up the foot. I'm going to cut the thread at the front. I'm not going to worry about the back thread for the moment because the actual seam then for the other side is just here. So I'm going to just move past that corner and start at the front seam going upwards. Exactly the same way. I'm not going to go too close to the corner so that it's difficult for me, and then I'm going to stitch up. Just one thing to note on this one is that I want you to stop when you get to the seam where the collar is attached. So I don't want you to do anything above this seam, simply because when it's open you see it, so it looks much nicer if you stop about here. that's that side. Now, oh, I think everything's falling apart. I've done that side. I'm going to take it off now so that I can orientate myself to the other side seam. I'll let you do that. When you've done, I want you to meet me at the ironing board. So now for the big reveal. So some people call this giving birth. I find that a bit weird. But we're basically going to reach through the hole in the back and we're going to pull the jacket the right way round. Now at this point you might be worrying that you're going to have to hand sew that gap shut, but I promise you we have a trick up our... Pull my tacking out then. We have a trick up our sleeve, so don't worry about that. So we're going to pull everything through to the right side and we're just going to spend some time beautifully pressing all of the edges of this coat. So you've got down the two fronts, along the bottom, and you're just going to take your time, just make it look beautiful. The steps that you've done up to this point will really help because you've already pressed the seam once in one direction before you did your understitching. And then of course your understitching is supposed to be stopping your lining peeking over to the front. So both of those steps should make this one much easier. Just going to pull everything out. Sometimes I find it easier as well if I tuck the sleeves, the lining inside the actual sleeves so that it looks like a jacket. And you should be having a little bit of a ta-da moment, guys, because you should have something that really is starting to look like your coat. So what I'd like to do, spend some time just nice and gently pressing over all these side seams, and then I'll meet you in a mo. Okay, so you now have your coat lovely and pressed all along those edges, hopefully very proud of it. We've just got a few finishing touches to do now. The first one is to close the gap that we turned everything through. So we're going to use the hole that you left in the sleeve. So I'm going to reach inside that hole, right into the lining itself. And I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom where that hole is. So this is the hole on the outside. And here's my hand. And I'm going to take a hold of both. And I'm just going to pull them all the way through that hole in the lining. So if I open this out, you will be able to see there's the gap that we left. But what we can now do is pin that with right sides together and pop back to the machine and stitch that closed. Once we've stitched it closed, we simply push it back through that hole in the sleeve to where it belonged, and we compress it, and it will be as if there was never a gap there. I promise. I really love these little bits. This is called bagging out. It's a part of the process called bagging out, and it's all about making it look as neat and professional as we can do. The only hand stitching on the coat is the fastenings, so we will have to hand stitch a couple of the fastenings, and we will also hand stitch the gap in the sleeve closed, but hopefully you'll agree with me that it's nowhere near as much as what you might have thought you would have to hand sew. So that's all pinned. We're going to go to the machine and whiz that across, and I'll meet you back here and I'll show you how to hem the sleeves. So this is the bit we've just stitched. I'm just going to push it back through the sleeve to where it belonged. There's so much coat, isn't there, guys? And there is where the hole was. So I'm just going to press, and we're going to make sure the seams are up like the original instructions so that it all mixes in, and nobody would know that that's where you turned your coat around. Now let's have a go at the sleeves then. So it's a bit of a similar way of doing things, but there is an added complication to the sleeve. So the first thing that I want you to do, so you have the sleeve lining inside the sleeve there. I'm going to make sure nothing's twisted. Nothing's twisted. And then I'm going to put a pin, and I'm going to match those seams. Now they're actually the wrong side together at the moment, but that's absolutely fine. Popped a pin in so that they're kept together. I'm then going to reach to the sleeve that has the gap again, this one. I'm going to reach through the gap into the lining again, and I'm going to go all the way down this sleeve, and I'm going to take a hold of that pin. Okay, so my fingers are there. I'm going to take a hold of that pin, and carefully I'm going to pull everything through the hole in the sleeve. So this is what we're left with. So at the minute, we don't have the right sides of the fabric facing each other, which is what we are going to want to have. So I'm going to gently take the pin out that we put, and that pin was there to stop it twisting really. I'm going to take the pin out, and I'm just going to swap that round so that I have the right sides of those seams facing each other. And put another pin. So what you end up with is like a tube. So the sleeve lining is coming this way and the sleeves coming the other direction. And what you're going to do is pin it all the way around that edge. So start where you match the seams and just work your way around. Everything will get twisted, but that's fine. Put some in the other direction. And eventually you come back to where you started and everything's connected. It kind of reminds me of pushing two pipes together, I don't know why. So hopefully you can see that. So everything's right side together and everything's connected, but you're kind of in a loop here. I'm going to take you to the machine so you can see how we actually stitch that, and then you can do exactly the same thing on the other sleeve. So here we are with our loop. So I'm always going to start at this seam that we matched first. I'm going to push the lining underneath so that I can then pop the sleeve under there. And again, it's the 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. But what we're going to have to keep doing is pulling this around, pulling this edge around so that we don't stitch it underneath. So let's have a go. I'm going to go backwards and forwards. So I'm watching my seam allowance, but I will be constantly checking that nothing is stuck underneath. Before I check, I put the needle in so that I don't disturb anything when I'm pulling. So I only have so much in front of me at any one time. We're going to continue this till we get back to the seam where we started, and then you're going to repeat it on the other, you're going to push it back through the gap, sorry, in the sleeve, and then we're going to repeat and do exactly the same thing on the other sleeve. So all our hems and sleeve hems are all completed, and what we need to do now is to do a couple of little steps to stop our lining dropping whilst we're wearing it. So the first one is we're going to secure the collar. So what we're going to do is we're going to place pins right on the stitch line all the way around, and we're going to feel for that location. All of the seams, remember, were pushed upwards, so we should be able to put a pin in and then just check that it's in the right location on the other side. I want you to pin all the way around your collar, doing the same thing. So we're going to match the seams on the shoulders all the way around, pushing everything up out of the way, and then I'm going to show you how to stitch in the ditch. So I'll see you at the machine. So this is the collar and this is the coat. I just want to show you that I have a zipper foot on. What it means is that all the bulk that's here in this seam doesn't stop the zipper foot going past it. And then I've moved my needle all the way across to this side so that I can easily see where it's going into that sleeve, because the trick is we want to stitch precisely in that seam. So we're going to be kind of pulling the fabric away as we go. So let's see how we get on. Oh, and also you have a stitch length of number 4. So we're pulling and stitching as we go. Now there's a lot of bulk here in front of the camera, so I'm going to have to leave you to persevere with this because I need to move the camera, but you're going to stitch all the way around so that that collar is all fixed in place. So that is all of the machine stitching done. We've got a few little bits of hand sewing, if I can find my needle, to do, and then a good old press, and then you're ready for your ta-da moment. I can't wait. But let's finish this off first. So the last thing to stop everything dropping is to attach the lining to the coat just under this arm. Well, both arms actually. But we're going to reach through the hole in the sleeve again, and we're going to go all the way across to the other sleeve at the underarm point. So bear with me whilst I find my way. And then I'm just going to grip the lining and the jacket, and the coat at that point, and just gently pull it through. Now we don't need a lot of it to come through. We just need enough to see the 2 seams. So we're just going to take the 2 seams, she says. And we're simply going to stitch them together. So we're just going to do it on the seam allowance. I will bring it closer in 1 second. I'm just going to put my first stitch in so that I know where I am. Okay. So it doesn't have to be neat because it's on the inside, and it's also, hopefully you can see, this is the seam. We're actually stitching the seam allowances together, and it's that one that's under the arm. So it doesn't need to be extra specially neat, but it does need to be secure. So do a few big stitches at that point. Notice I started, sorry, I've just caught, oh no, I'm okay. Notice that I started on the opposite sleeve to the one that has the gap in it. If you do the one that has the gap first, you'll find it quite difficult to reach through to this one the furthest away. So if you could do this one first, that will really help. Okay, that's that one done. We can push that all the way back through. That's now secure. And then I've reached in again and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I've got the underarm points, just going to pull them through. I'm going to match the two underarm seams and I'm just going to put a few stitches there. Now even the next bit of hand sewing, which is stitching up the gap that we've left, it's in your sleeve, guys. So if hand sewing is not your expertise, don't stress about it. Nobody's going to see it. It's fine. Just needs to be secure. Okay, so finish that one off. Push that through. And then we're going to work on this gap here. I'm going to just change my thread to a coordinated colour so that we can't see it. And I'll try and bring you in a bit closer so that for those of you that haven't done a lot of hand sewing, you can see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to bring you around. So hopefully you can see this is our gap. So I folded in the raw edge and I'm just going to pop some pins down there. Now it doesn't matter if those pins go through everything, so long as you don't stitch through everything. Otherwise you're never going to get your arm in. But if it's easier at this point just to stitch all the way through, go for it. Now you can do this with a ladder stitch. I'm just going to do a whip stitch just because it's the easiest stitch and we're not going to see it. So I'm going to start off, you see, I'm going to start off with just a couple of little stitches. Let's move that pin. Just a couple of stitches in the same place. And that's what anchors everything, stops everything falling apart. It's similar to a back stitch on your machine. So once we're happy that that's secure, we're just going to move over, grab a bit of the lining and then a bit of the lining that we tucked under. Move over, grab the lining. I'm just trying to find the best angle. Try that angle. There we go. So we're going to grab just the lining on this side and then go through the folded bit. And then we're going to move on. So it's a really quick, she says, I'm no expert in hand sewing, so please don't feel bad if you're not any good at it. Just has to be secure. Some people will do this really quickly. I don't think I'm the slowest, but I'm certainly not the fastest. So I'm going in one side, now the other, making sure I'm not catching any of the coat. It is just the lining that I'm interested in. I'm going to do this all the way so till the gap is closed, and then I'm going to do some little stitches in the same location just like I did when I started, and then we're all secured. Now there is one last thing for us to do, and that's to stitch the fasteners on. Now I don't put any fastener on the collar, and that's my choice because I quite like the loose, relaxed look of it. I'm only going to show you where to put 2 fasteners, but feel free. You can put some fasteners on the collar if you wish, and you can also put some fasteners further down the front. That is the beauty of making your own clothes. You can do what the hell you like, guys. So you put them wherever you please. So I'm going to show you how to put a press stud on. You can put whatever fastening you like, really. That is completely up to you. I've gone for press studs that are approximately 18mm. I think you need a substantial press stud if you're going with a press stud, so I wouldn't go for less than that. But there's some really cute ones nowadays, isn't there, out and about? So yeah, really go for it. So I've gone for these black press studs, which might look silver depending on the camera angle. This is a tailor's tack, so let me just smarten it up for you. It's actually just caught in the top stitching, just so that it makes it clearer what you're actually looking at. she says, and then she pulls one out. We still got one left in to show you. There we go. So that is the original tailor's tack. So there's one this side, and there is also one at the back here. So I've stuck a pin through the centre of both of them, and that's my guide. Now the beauty when you're using a press stud is that you can actually feed your press stud, which is difficult. There we go. Feed your press stud over the top of that pin so that you know that you're in the correct place. What I also like to do with press studs is just to roughly stitch them on with a contrasting colour. So I've got this white here, and I'm just going to roughly go around keeping it in place. I don't care whether the thread doubles up. I don't really care what it looks like because it's going to be coming out. Once I'm halfway, I'm just going to get rid of that pin because it's kind of in my way now. And I'll do another one over here just so that we're all sorted. Now, the one thing to think about when you're doing the real hand sewing is that your stitching is going to be visible on the correct side of the jacket. So you really do want to put some thought into it and make sure that you're doing it as neat as you can. On the left hand side of your jacket, actually let's clarify that. On the right hand side as you're wearing it, but on the left hand side if it's in front of you here, so this is my left, the press studs go on the inside, and then on the opposite side they go on the outside of the coat, just to make sure that they connect. I think that's worth saying, because if I was listening along I would have got that wrong. So what we're going to do is we're just going to anchor the thread first. So we're just going to leave a little tail. I'm hoping you can see, yeah, little tail. And then we're just going to go round 3 little stitches, and that just stops the thread from coming undone. I'm not going all the way to the front with these, I'm just going through the one layer of fabric. And then when I'm ready, I'm going to go for it. So I'm going to go down the next one, all the way through to the back, and pull it through. My needles come off, and then I'm going to come back up where I started. So I'm just basically focusing on one stitch, but what I can do is I can use the back as a guide as to where I'm going to go. So if we turn it to this side, can you see I can go in here, she says, and it will come up at the right place. And it also makes it look incredibly neat on that right side. So I'm going to go 4 times, 4 stitches, and then I'm going to move on to the next one. So you should have a really neat circle of stitches on the side that you are working on. So let's move on to the next one. So now I'm going to come up in that next one there, can you see? And then I'm going to go down. And I just want to show you on the back how it's working out. Can you see you just getting just these little stitches all the way around? So you'll just have a really neat circle of stitches. All the way around. And then obviously when you finish, you're going to get rid of all of this white, all this temporary stitching, and it's going to look really neat and lovely. When you get to the end, as in when you've gone all the way around, you're going to do the 3 stitches again. Why won't you go through? Because we're in the wrong hole, that's why. There we go. So when you've gone through all of these holes, you're just simply going to do 3 stitches again like you did when you started to anchor the thread. Get rid of all of these temporary stitches and then work on the next one. So I'm going to leave you to it. It's really difficult to do this with the camera in front of me. I'm not copying out, I promise. But I'll leave you to attach all 4 of your fastenings, whatever that is. Give your garment a good old press and then we'll have our ta-da moment. All right, guys, speak to you soon. Ta-da! Guys, I've failed just slightly because the light's fading here. So actually putting the press studs on is causing me some issues. It snowed all day today since I started filming. It snowed and snowed. So I do need to go and rescue my husband who is now stuck in the snow. So hopefully you'll forgive me, but at least we got this finished. I could do with a good old press and then I've got my press studs to put on, but I am really pleased with how this turned out and I really hope that you are. I hope you loved this tutorial. I hope you really enjoyed making the patterns. If you did, shout about it, tell me, share it with me. I love seeing the projects that you guys make. It makes it all worthwhile for me because doing these tutorials is quite nerve-wracking. I probably don't look very nervous, but trust me, I am quite nervous. So yeah, share all your makes with me. If you like the tutorial, let me know. If there's something you felt I missed or didn't do quite right, let me know too. We can all improve on things. But yeah, go ahead and flounce in your new coat, guys. And I'll see you sometime soon. Take care. Bye.